In our modern world, obsessed with external success and validation, we often forget the part of us that truly needs to grow, our inner world, the conditioning, patterns, beliefs, and untold stories that shape our lives. Here at the Inner Bloom podcast, we explore the psychology and spiritual wisdom that helps us understand ourselves, break cycles, and return to who we really are. This is where inner growth begins. Have you ever shown a side of yourself to someone, like a quirky side, a silly side, a vulnerable side, and it didn't land the way you expected? Maybe you cracked a joke that you thought was hilarious, and the room went quiet. Or you finally told someone close to you how their actions have been hurting you, and instead of leaning in, they pulled away. And you're left wondering, was I wrong for saying that? Should I have just kept it to myself? Am I too much? Do I come off too strong? And on the other hand, there are those people who seem to get along with everyone. They go to the parties and everyone knows them and they can talk to everyone and hold a conversation. They're liked, they're agreeable. But when you actually get to know them, you realize that they don't really have quirks or opinions or vulnerabilities of their own. Somewhere along the way, many of us have learned to trade pieces of ourselves for acceptance. We give when we don't want to give. We stay quiet when something doesn't feel right. And when we have the courage to do so, when we're faced with a form of rejection, we shrink ourselves, not because we're weak, but because we're threatened of belonging in society. Sometimes our authenticity leaks out in unexpected ways. You're watching a movie and suddenly you're crying at a scene you didn't think would affect you at all. Maybe someone hurts us and instead of shutting down, we become brave and walk away and we surprise ourselves with that reaction. What if those moments feel so confusing? Because we've suppressed our authentic selves for so long that when they finally surface, we don't recognize them. What if we've confused attachment, like being accepted, being chosen, with authenticity, being honest, embodied, and true? And what if learning to be authentic again isn't about becoming somebody new, but about remembering who you were before you learned you had to disappear to belong? And that is the topic of today's episode: authenticity versus attachment from a psychological and Buddhist perspective. Let's get into it. According to Dr. Gabor Mate, a trauma and childhood development expert, every human being grows up navigating two core needs: attachment and authenticity. As children, attachment comes first, not because it's healthier, but because it's necessary for survival. Human infants are born with some of the least developed brains of any species. We are completely dependent on our caregivers, not just for food and shelter, but for emotional regulation and safety, more than any species on this earth. So, attachment becomes a biological survival need. Attachment means connection, belonging, and being loved, and learning how to love in return. And that need doesn't disappear as we grow older. It's how we form families, friendships, and communities. And historically, losing that tribe didn't just hurt emotionally, but moreover, it meant losing protection, resources, and ultimately losing life. Because if you're kicked out of the tribe, you're more likely to be attacked by a bear because you're exiled in the forest. So while that threat doesn't exist in the modern day, our nervous systems are still so wired to prioritize this attachment. But at the same time, we have another need, especially as children: authenticity. Authenticity is our capacity to know what we feel, to be in touch with our own bodies, our instincts, and to express who we are in our relationships and in how we move through life. Authenticity is not a luxury. It's essential for long-term mental, emotional, and even physical well-being. But attachment is more necessary for human survival. When a child's authentic expression threatens their attachment with their caregivers, there is a massive issue, and the child will eventually choose attachment behaviors over authentic behaviors. Imagine a child expresses anger, sadness, fear, needs, preferences. If the caregivers reject these feelings or needs, or they can't tolerate the emotion, or they punish it in a certain way, the child will learn that being my true self, being my authentic self, threatens connection. So they suppress their authenticity and act in another way to maintain attachment towards their caretakers. They behave in a way that pleases their caretakers to make sure that they can get the love from their caretakers, the resources, and the care that will keep them alive. I want to clarify, though, that this harm is often unintentional. Parents or guardians may be unhealed themselves from their childhoods, and a lot of hurt is not malicious, but the impact still shapes the child's nervous system. And I want to give a more in-depth example about this. Imagine a child who is about 5 years old, and they are sad because their parent missed something important to them, like a dance recital. And they say, "That hurt my feelings." And the parent, overwhelmed, responds with, "Stop being so sensitive." Nothing extreme happened, but the message lands to the child anyway. My feelings create distance between my caretaker. So the child learns, if I express how I feel, I risk losing connection. It's safer to stay quiet, and it's safer to adjust myself. And that is how authenticity gets suppressed. And when that child chooses attachment over authenticity enough times, it stops feeling like a choice at all. And these childhood experiences directly shape how we act and think and feel as adults. And for a lot of adults, emotional numbness doesn't feel alarming. It feels like our normal selves. A friend asks, "How are you?" And the answer comes out automatically. "I'm good. Everything's fine." Or, if we're being honest, "I don't know." Not because these are the true answers, but because we genuinely don't have access to what we feel anymore. Over time, you might notice that your emotional range feels limited. You can name good, bad, or stressed, but anything more nuanced, like anxious, limerence, fear, angry, that feels more blurry. Another thing is you don't realize you're upset until you have snapped, shut down, or completely burned out. We get so used to maintaining composure until we hit a breaking point, and then we completely go from 0 to 100. And there are major mental and physical costs to suppressing your own authenticity. Chronically suppressing it leads to mental illness, addiction, burnout, relationship dissatisfaction, and it increases death risk according to this study. It followed 2,000 women over 10 years, and one portion of the group held on to their authentic feelings in the marriage, while the other portion expressed their authentic feelings consistently to their partner at the start of the marriage. After the 10 years, they measured the likeliness of the women to die. So those who expressed their feelings only 10 years into the marriage were 4 times more likely to die than those women who expressed their feelings early on. So clearly, suppressing our authentic selves is very harmful to our quality of life and our lifespan. When we're talking about healing our authentic selves and restoring that, we're not talking about forcing ourselves to be authentic overnight. We are talking about slowly teaching the nervous system that what once kept us safe is no longer necessary. As children, suppressing ourselves protected connection. But as adults, that same strategy keeps us disconnected from our bodies, our truth, and our relationships. And what is interesting is that this isn't just something modern psychology is discovering. This understanding has existed in Buddhism for thousands of years, not through the language of trauma or nervous systems, but through wisdom, compassion, and truth. And where psychology explains why authenticity feels unsafe, Buddhism shows us how returning to ourselves becomes an act of healing. We think that suppressing authenticity is what will strengthen our relationships with others, but Buddhism argues that being more authentic will drive out the relationships that are not true and bring in the most genuine relationships you can have in this lifetime. And Buddhism defines authenticity as an alignment of our thoughts, words, and actions with our true nature. Authenticity is not being flawless, fearless, and saying everything without any care in the world. Rather, authenticity is being vulnerable, standing on what feels right or wrong to you, and naming your desires and needs instead of staying silent. Like asking for reassurance from somebody, wanting more closeness or more space, admitting you want something different, rather than slowly resenting someone for not reading your mind. And most importantly, Buddhism defines authenticity as courage. The courage to do all of this while accepting a hard truth. Not everyone will be able to stay in your life when you show up as your authentic self. Some people don't leave because you did something wrong. They leave because the version of you that kept them comfortable no longer exists. That is not failure. That is alignment. Because being authentic doesn't come from being perfect, agreeable, or easy to love. It comes from integrity, knowing that you didn't abandon yourself to keep the connection. And that is what authenticity actually gives you. A sense of safety that no amount of external approval ever could. Becoming authentic isn't about creating a new self. It's about uncovering what's already there. And here's a simple exercise for you all to do. Think about a recent moment where you felt drained, disconnected, or resentful. And ask yourself, was I being myself in that moment, or was I managing someone else's comfort? Whatever the answer is, just notice it. Awareness alone is already part of the practice. And the reality is, most of us are walking around with some version of the same wound that our authentic selves are too much, or we won't get accepted and will be abandoned. And it's not because our parents were necessarily bad people, or because anything obviously went wrong in our upbringing or in our current lives, but it's because human beings grow up in families, schools, cultures, societies that quietly teach us what is acceptable and what is not. And at some point, almost all of us have learned to not be too emotional, not be too difficult, to not rock the boat, and to be chill, be agreeable, be easy to be around. And we're praised for that. When you do that, life works, at least on the surface. You keep the friends, you keep the job, your parents are proud, your relationship stays calm because you're not bringing anything up. Everything looks peaceful, but that peace often comes at the cost of yourself. You constantly feel this unnamed emptiness and you're at war with yourself because that suppressed, authentic version of you is still there and it's screaming to be expressed and come out. Because real authenticity, expressing that is messy and it has opinions and emotions and it says, that hurt me, even when it risks conflict. When you start showing up this way, some people will fall away. Not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped abandoning yourself to keep the connection, and because they are not acting from their authentic selves, and they don't have the courage to fight for that true version of themselves. I'd rather be deeply known by a few people than vaguely liked by many, because the relationships where you don't have to perform, where you can disagree, feel deeply, and grow, those are the ones that actually nourish us. Authenticity isn't about erasing fear. It's about living in integrity with it. It's not about being liked by everyone. It's about being real enough that the right people can find you and grow with you. So maybe the question isn't who should I become, but something quieter and more honest. Where am I ready to stop betraying myself? And I'll wrap this up with a short and sweet quote. You are what you think. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope it helped and inspired, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.